Okay, so we're going to discuss a little bit about the War of 1812. This can be found in your book from Chapter 6, Section 4. I'll talk a little bit about the causes, some of the major battles or events, and some of the outcomes that result from this war. Okay, so what we're going to see is that one of the major events that kind of causes or becomes a catalyst for this war is going to be the Chesapeake incident, where basically British soldiers or the British Navy tried to board a USS ship known as the Chesapeake. We refused, and as a result, they opened fire and killed some Americans and wounded others, and confiscated some soldiers, or what they believed to be members of the British Navy, and 3 of them actually were native born. But this is kind of where it all starts with the British, what is known as impressment. They're stealing our sailors on the open seas, so we believe in freedom of the seas, and that's one of the events that leads to this. So impressment, and this is kind of one of the first events in 1807 that kind of caused this early on. So as a result of that, under the guidance of Thomas Jefferson, we created the Embargo Act of 1807, which pretty much stopped all of our sale of American products to other countries. As a result of this, it's going to be very negative. It's basically going to cripple our economy. So from 1807 to 1808, we're going to drop from $108 million of exports to $22 million. In the end, it basically hurts American merchants and farmers. And farmers, as you remember, are the ones that Thomas Jefferson stood up for, believed in. It's later going to get repealed by Congress because of the fact that it was so disastrous to our economy. Another factor or cause for the War of 1812, other than the impressment or the imprisoning of our sailors on the open seas, is going to be Native Americans. We had encounters with them, and they started encroaching or going into their lands. As a result of this, conflicts break out between the Native Americans. One of these people will be a person by the name of Tecumseh. The other one will be his brother, the Prophet. He's a Shawnee leader, and as a result of this, we start moving into their area, and he starts forming a military alliance to resist us. And he urges all of his people not to sell any lands to the settlers, and that if they're going to do it, they need to do it collectively, not just as individuals. So as a result of that, they're going to have the Battle of Tippecanoe, which happens in Indiana. The leader there is William Henry Harrison, and basically the Native Americans are going to get destroyed, which ends the dreams of Tecumseh as a confederation for the Native American tribes. And as a result of this, we realized that the British had been supplying Tecumseh's forces with weapons, which really angered us. So you can see this as another encounter. So it's dealing with natives on the frontier and finding weapons in their hands. So we have impressments, one of the causes, and restriction of trade on the seas. And the second cause is Native American encounters with the settlers and finding British weapons in their hands. So as a result of that, some of these war hawks who are primarily from the South and the West push for war against Great Britain. The other reason that they want this, and the third reason for the cause, is going to be to expand into Canada. As we know, the British at this point still have Canada under their guidance, and as a result of that, we're going to push for taking over Canada and expanding our frontier even further and eliminating a Native American alliance. So President James Madison declares war, or pushes for Congress to declare war. Congress is pretty split between this, but as I mentioned before, the South and the West supported the war, mainly for the idea that more agriculture at this point would benefit those people in those areas. And then the Mid-Atlantic and the New England states, which are mainly going to be the ones who are merchants, feared a British blockade and didn't want the war to happen. They reluctantly called for war and declared war on Britain. So just to reiterate that, British impressment was a cause, British arming Native Americans, the desire for Canada, and then the interference of American ships on trade and so forth. We weren't really prepared for it, not very well supplied. We also go into this war with very little strategy. Our strategy is to try and conquer Canada because we thought that they would be weak. As a result of it, it doesn't work. And then we have various wars at sea. We did a little bit better, actually. The best example is going to be the U.S. frigate, the USS Constitution. Americans are going to raid British ships at this point. You're going to have even Captain Oliver Hazard Perry, who wins selective battles on Lake Erie, hence the name of Perry, Georgia. And we have met the enemy, and the enemy, they are ours. Early on in the war, though, Britain was focused on winning against France and Napoleon. But after Napoleon's defeat, the British changed their strategy and invade the United States from the north, from Canada, and from the south, from New Orleans. So this 1814, they become more directly involved. As a result of that, in August of 1814, they attacked Washington, D.C. They're going to burn down major buildings, including the White House. This is where Dolly Madison saves the famous portrait of George Washington. It's also the same time that Francis Scott Key is going to be outside in the harbor in Baltimore at Fort McHenry, where he writes the Star-Spangled Banner. Okay, so the end of the war, the Treaty of Ghent is going to be signed on Christmas Eve of 1814 between the United States and Britain. It officially ends the war. Neither side really wins anything territorially, and it doesn't even really deal with the idea of trade problems and impressment of our sailors. But after the war is actually over with and the treaty signed, the Battle of New Orleans will occur between the American troops against the British. This is where you see the command of General Andrew Jackson, where he defeats the British with kind of a rough and tumble crew, but kind of pushes him into being acknowledged as a key war hero later on. So the results of this war strengthen the control of our Northwest Territory. We get more settlements there as a result of that. There's going to be a peace between us and Britain. Nationalism starts to spike, so we're more proud of ourselves. We win more international respect, and we start realizing that our industry could prosper if it needed to, but it's kind of early in this phase. So those are going to be pretty much the outcomes of the War of 1812. So the causes you saw there: impressment of sailors, finding weapons in Native Americans' hands, and desire for Canada, and dealing with trade issues, and then the outcomes being strengthening nationalism, respect in the world community, industry starts prospering, and our control over the Northwest Territories. So just kind of keep this in mind when you study for the War of 1812.